Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
I want to say about to the comment that came in before about putting it on the wiki that exercise, and I saw in the back channel the concern about the scope of the questions and the thinness of the answers. In a way, it's a width versus depth trade-off, and we may have made the wrong one by putting in all the questions as they came in from people. What we want to do is get a lateral conversation going among groups who might not otherwise directly run into one another's research or open-ended questions. We're going to continue to look for some way to do this after the conference. We'll put it on the wiki. We'll send out mail making it available. But that's really the goal, is to get people to have those conversations across boundaries they might not otherwise have it. As with Robin saying, we have large data sets. There are some characteristics we need to meet. Maybe we can have a conversation about this that's productive. I want to talk about a different effort, which I want to also invite you all to participate in if you're interested in. I've mentioned this to some people here, which is at Interactive Telecommunications Program. We're working on a pattern language for social spaces. The goal of that comes from the observation that the conversation around social spaces is often either too large-scale or too granular. The large-scale conversation is, I know, let's just adopt slash code and we'll get everything that's good about Slashdot now with our community's logo at the top. And if you go to the Slashcode site and it says, here's a bunch of servers that are running Slashcode, the list is empty. Right? That strategy simply has not worked. Slashdot is too big a boat anchor to move easily from one place to another. The other thing that happens is that some organization or some group says, I know, what we need here is community. Let's get a blog or, a wiki. And if a wiki is a good idea, a blog probably isn't, and vice versa. So if the conversation is going on at that level of magic pixie dust, something is missing. Then the next thing that goes on with that conversation is they often say, well, let's get the software we need to run this. And then the software is spec'd for things like, will it run on our server? Is it programmed in PHP? Without regard to the original goals or motivations of the desire to have community in the first place. So what we're trying to do now, and I say this is me, some graduate students, and then some participants on the wiki, which we've got up, is to describe common patterns without reference to particular software packages. What are the kinds of things that happen commonly in a bunch of these spaces? We're concentrating principally on asynchronous, non-game conversational spaces. So we're not right now concentrating on describing things like IRC, nor are we concentrating on describing things like Warcraft. One of the earliest ones we broke down was Slashdot, just because it's been such a touchstone. So the question that Slashdot has to solve is, of course, the tragedy of the commons problem, right? How do we make a large conversational space available without having the rhetorical commons taken over by people? The macro answer is Slashdot gets committed users to defend readers from writers. That's the basic mechanism of Slashdot. There are lots and lots and lots of moving parts to that. The karma system, the meta moderation system, the login system, and so forth. And what we are trying to do is describe what Slashdot is up to in a way that doesn't refer directly to those systems, but describes the pattern. One of the earliest patterns we noticed, and these are then the titles of the patterns, everyone has a page on the wiki that describes sort of when and why you do this, is moving comments to a separate page. That seems really simple, right? Do you attach comments to the main page if something is being commented on, or do you move it to a separate page? And in fact, many software packages come with a default assumption about that without ever saying why they make that assumption. But if you move comments to the separate page, what you're saying editorially is, this is a separate space for discussing this material. It's not for everybody. We're cutting down the size of the audience for the comments. If you leave the comments on the main page, what you're saying is, this is as important as the material it's commenting on. So the choice of inline comments versus separate page comments actually has a big effect on the user's mental model of what they're doing, even though the trivialness of the click means that in terms of technological choices, people often don't pay much attention to it. Treat readers and writers differently, right? This is an absolutely basic aspect of Slashdot, and indeed many of these systems with karma and reputation. And yet, we're still often in a world where we're talking about users, and then we later have to go and disambiguate what we mean by users. It's much more profitable, we are hypothesizing, in systems like this to talk about readers and writers than it is to talk about users, because in fact, you can make a bunch of choices and give readers a bunch of freedoms that you can't give writers, because readers are in a way the people you need to defend from the writers. Plainly, let the users rate the posts. This is the axle on which Slashdot turns. And again, you can refer to this as a pattern. You can decide whether or not you want a system that lets users rate the posts without having to refer directly to the software. And finally, set defensive defaults. Slashdot's defaults are set in such a way that no reader will see what you write unless a logged-in user has touched it. Right? So they have a defensive perimeter, which is people who have made themselves known to Slashdot as committed logged-in users. Either you logged in and you posted it yourself and they see it, or you posted it as an anonymous coward and someone else rated it up. So that combination of things, without reference to Slashcode itself, kind of breaks down what Slashdot does to defend readers from writers. That, of course, creates a second problem. Once we've solved the tragedy of the commons problem, we now have one group that has higher degree of authority. This came up in the sovereignty conversation yesterday. What do we do about the who will guard the guardians problem? Right? If people can go around rating one another's posts, how do we keep people from just rating their enemies down and their friends up no matter what's being said? So then Slashdot implements a number of patterns that you can talk about without respect to Slashdot, and you can talk about implementing them one at a time. You can treat users and members differently. Right? So that's a second split, which is if I know you're logged in, I know you have a profile on the system, you've actually built up something that's of some value. So I can give you different levels of control because I know you've got some reason not to defect. You can measure good behavior once you have logged in members, the karma system. You can actually enlist committed members to help, both with the meta-moderated system and with the sort of jury pool for rating. And to add to the who will guard the guardians, you can build the judges can't post system. Now, there's no reason, and that's 8 of the patterns. There are obviously many more on Slashdot. There's no reason that all 8 of those patterns have to travel together. And you can actually go through and decide a bit at a time, this is the kind of thing we like. The hope here is that these patterns will be expressed in such a way that it will actually allow techies and non-techies to have a conversation together about what the goals are and how best they're implemented. Another thing you can do is you can start to look at what happens if you violate patterns, right? If you make different kinds of choices. One of the interesting things that we've seen in trying to describe this, we went out with a traditional patterns and anti-patterns model. And we've found almost no anti-patterns because there's almost nothing you could do that wouldn't be a desirable effect in some context. So Slashdot's rating system, for example, creates an annotative culture rather than a conversational culture. And if you want conversation, that's bad. But if you want to deflect conversation in the direction of annotation, which is what Slashdot wants, that's good. So in many ways, they're all patterns, and it's just a matter of the context. How much do you want community coherence versus quality of annotation to be your goal? So you can start to take these patterns and imagine what happens if you turn them around. Another site we've spent a lot of time looking at is Bronze Beta, which is the Buffy the Vampire Slayer fan board. Bronze Beta looks like a circa 1996 classic CGI-mediated web board. This is the top of the front page. There's your name. There's your email address. There's your comments. When you click here, that page reloads and your comment is on top. And that's it. That's all there is. Now, it's easy to suppose, as we did when we first started looking at this, that that's just because this is an old system, that it was built when Bronze Beta was launched or when Buffy the Vampire Slayer launched. Interestingly, it's Bronze Beta because there was an original Bronze bulletin board, which was hosted by WB when the TV show launched. When WB sold Buffy to UPN, they said, we're going to cancel these boards. Right? We don't want the expense or the hassle of running an online community. The users got together, pooled their own money, hired a design firm, and said, you must give us a bulletin board. But our principal request is, don't have any features. Right? Do not give us threading. Do not give us rating. Do not give us ranking. Do not give us karma. Recreate the board that the community has already been fitted to. So one of the really interesting patterns is simply to refuse to have features at all above a certain level. Right? That's a relatively alien concept in a world of high degrees of profiles and checkboxes. But it's worked well for the Buffy group, and you can start to see that at the very basic level of patterns, the choice not to have features at all can actually be a very powerful one. Buffy, unlike Slashdot, comments are absolutely central. There is nothing but comments. There is no threading, in fact. There are no topic lines. It is simply the sum total of what the community has said to one another. The entire site rolls up into one page. It is in many ways the anti-Slashdot, and is also very successful on its own terms. And perhaps most interestingly, the login and password are both optional, meaning you can go in unnamed. You can go in named but not protect your name, or you can go in and protect your name. So rather than having you have to log in to use this service, or you can log in or not, as with Slashdot, they actually allow a relatively fluid set of choices about identity, which have to do with the user's commitment to the service. So a lot of what we've assumed is the reference model. You log in, you register, you get a password, and then you always use that, are really just habits of the tools, and they're not necessarily the right set of design choices. Another set of design choices, again related to this question of login, but radically different from either of the previous two models, is Writely. Writely doesn't have a concept of users because it treats the group as a first-class object. A Writely document, which is essentially a wiki-like place to edit a single document, has a login for the group. It presumes that if you know the URL and the password, that you belong there. And it doesn't, in fact, deal with all of the user management overhead. So instead of protecting it on a user-by-user basis, it's working on an invitation-only basis. Send out the URL plus password to anybody you need to have it. And it's specifically for time-limited work. This gets to the pattern we were talking about earlier of what happens when spaces need to come and go quickly. The assumption with Writely is there's a kind of on-ramp, build-it, off-ramp pattern, rather than this should be an open-ended conversation about macrame, which should last as long as it possibly can. It is, we've got to get a document out by next Thursday. And by being time-limited, they actually, again, get rid of a lot of features. So, as I said, we've set up a wiki. I'll give you the URL for it. Please come join us, both take a look and add to it. The goal here, obviously, is to create a way of characterizing these kinds of spaces with descriptions of pattern without regard to the software, in part to make comparison between kinds of software and between kinds of communities possible, and in part, we hope, to stimulate a design conversation around what would happen if we reversed that pattern. As we've seen with user logins, taking the default assumption and reversing them often leads to profitable alternate models. And we're going to start exploring what else we could do given the patterns we're able to observe out there now. So there's that. Thank you.